Sit back in the soft leather seats of a luxury limousine. Take a sip of your favourite cocktail and join us on today's educational ride as you learn words, expressions and idioms connected to the theme of limousine drivers and chauffeurs. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello and welcome, especially if you're a new listener to the podcast. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And with nearly 60 years of teaching English between us, Reza and I are going to help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you doing, Reza?
I was doing well before our first podcast, and I'm doing even better now because I had a lovely cup of tea, which you made for me, and a lime Jaffa cake biscuit. Oh, what a treat. It was delicious. I don't know if listeners are familiar with Jaffa cakes, that fairly traditional British biscuit, which normally has an orange filling with chocolate. Well, Marks and Spencer's have invented one with lime, and it was divine, wasn't it?
It was very, very tasty. So we're ready to go with this week's podcast and a voice message from Sebastian.
Hey, Reza and Craig. I'm happy to sending to you this message through SpeakPipe. My name is Sebastian, and I love your podcast. I'm listening to it every early morning during my way to my first pickup. I want to suggest a topic for our future podcast. As a driver for limousine transportation services, I would like to hear from you. What are all the vocabulary and expressions that are involved with this kind of services? Thank you so much for all the teaching and patience and all the knowledge you transmit through this podcast. I hope you're doing well, and I hope you can take my suggestion. A big hug to both of you, and take care.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, and we'd like to send some virtual hugs to you as well. Thank you for your message. Reza, any comments on Sebastian's message?
Thank you very much, Sebastian. All I can say is that it was a really, really clear message. Good pronunciation. And I didn't notice any mistake except one tiny little thing. I think you said, although it may have been the audio, but I think you said, I'm listening to it. Did you hear that, Craig?
Yes, I think so, yeah.
You put in the verb to be, I'm. So you should have said, I listen to it. But I think you said, I'm. I may be wrong, but let's just clarify. That was the only thing. Apart from that, it was a perfect message and a very nice message. Thank you very much.
And we hope we're not putting you to sleep as you're listening to the podcast driving your limo, Sebastian. We're not going to talk today about specific car and driving vocabulary because we've already done that, Sebastian. If you go to episode 101, so that's inglespodcast.com/101, you'll hear lots of vocabulary specifically connected to cars and driving. And we've also spoken about different transport, haven't we, Reza?
Yes, we did an episode on different means of transport. A means is a mode, from bicycles to high-speed trains, including cars as well. You can find that at inglespodcast.com/527, episode 527.
And we've also spoken about long-distance lorry drivers, which isn't the same as driving a limousine, a luxury car, but you'll find some specific vocabulary connected to truckers, people who drive trucks and lorries at inglespodcast.com/283. Today, we're specifically focusing on chauffeurs and limousine drivers. So, Reza, let's look at some vocabulary connected to this area.
Well, let's start off with the most important word for Sebastian, limousine. Also, limo. So it's shortened to LIMO, but the full version has a U in it, Limousine, limousine. And as I'm sure a lot of you know, it's a large, always large, never a small car, a large, luxurious car. And it's often driven by a chauffeur. And it's often hired for special events. So you can hire a limousine by the hour or by the day. I guess there's a few VIPs, a few very rich, important people who have their own limousine, but most people hire limousines for special events.
Limousines tend to be very long cars. We can say that they have a very wide wheelbase. So there's a long distance between the front wheels and the back wheels. And sometimes they're called stretch limos or stretched limos with ED at the end of stretch, because it's almost like somebody's taken a car and pulled both sides of the car to stretch the car to be really, really long, which means there's lots of room inside so that many people can sit in the limousine. They often have a bar where you can serve yourself drinks and very, very comfortable chairs. So in order to put all of these luxurious things inside the car, it needs to be very long. So a stretch limo.
Yes, you can even get some stretch limos that have 3 rows of seats. So as you know, a car normally has the front row where the driver sits, the chauffeur obviously, and a passenger or 2 can be beside him, and then the back row. But in some stretch limos, they have a 3rd row, and quite often the 2nd and 3rd row face each other. So the row in the middle might be looking backwards and the 3rd row forward, so that they can chat and have a little group. So there could be 5 or 6 people in one space, as well as the people in the front row.
And these limousines often have sunroofs, don't they? That's a hole in the roof, the top part of the car, that you can open. And if you've seen films of people in limousines driving around or being driven around, let's use the passive because the chauffeur's driving and the customer or the client is being driven around, Las Vegas, for example, and everybody jumps out of the roof of the car, pouring champagne, having a fantastic party time, and they put their heads and the upper part of their bodies outside the sunroof. Would you like to do that?
I'd like, if I ever get into a limo, can you believe it, Sebastian? I've never been in a limo, but if I ever get in one, that's something I got to do. Stick my head out of the sunroof, surrounded by beautiful women, goodness knows why they're with me, drinking champagne.
They're probably with you because you're paying, Reza.
For the champagne, yeah.
Especially in Las Vegas. Yeah.
Paying only for the champagne, let me clarify that.
Of course, of course. So a chauffeur, obviously not obviously, but we'll say it's from French, chauffeur. Chauffeur, I think is the French pronunciation. That was a terrible attempt at French. So a chauffeur is a person who is employed to drive a private car or a hired car, especially a luxury vehicle. Chauffeurs tend to wear uniforms. They're very smart. They probably have a shirt and tie and a suit and maybe even a chauffeur's cap on their head. And they are paid to drive a car, especially a luxury vehicle.
Craig, have you ever met any chauffeurs?
Actually, my dad was a chauffeur before he retired. He's now passed away, sadly, but he started as a self-employed chauffeur. So he bought top of the range, which means one of the most expensive cars. I think it was a Ford, which isn't a typically classic luxury car, but the very expensive Fords in those days were really, really nice. Leather seats and the very first car phones back in the day. And he had contracts with television studios and other places in London. And he used to drive quite famous people around in the car. He drove Paul McCartney's daughter, Stella McCartney, and other famous people. And then he got a job as a chauffeur for the South African embassy. So he used to drive President de Klerk when he came over on a state visit. He lived in Kensington with my mum, and he used to drive the ambassador, the South African ambassador in London, around London.
Your dad lived in Kensington?
Yes, but he lived above the garage where the car was. So it was a very small flat. It was the chauffeur's accommodation, but it had a lovely balcony with a view of the South African ambassador's garden at the back. So I remember the view of the garden was amazing in the middle of London, this beautiful area with lovely plants and flowers. But the flat itself was quite small and quite normal, nothing special. What was very nice when I went to visit them was the fact that it was right in the middle of London, and Kensington is a lovely part of London.
Yes.
And very expensive.
That's why you had my attention there. Kensington's probably the most expensive neighborhood in the whole of London. And I reckon if Craig and I put our money together, took out a loan from the bank, a mortgage, and won the lottery, we might be able to buy a share along with 10 other people in a small garage in Kensington, but not a house. Forget about that. You need several £1 million to buy a house in Kensington.
You do. It's very expensive. But luckily, this accommodation came together as a package as part of the job as being a chauffeur for the embassy. Yeah, it was a good job. And that gave him the money to be able to retire and move to Spain.
So I imagine your dad has some good stories, but I would say that above all, he had to display a lot of discretion.
Yes, he did, because he was driving famous people who were speaking in the back of the car, often about politics, international politics. So obviously he could not repeat anything that he heard in the car. So discretion is the noun. The adjective is discreet. If you are a discreet person, you have a lot of discretion. So you're very good at handling or dealing with managing sensitive information or sensitive matters with confidentiality. So he couldn't speak about many things that he heard in the car when he was driving.
So, Craig, I'm just imagining President de Klerk getting into the car and getting out the very chunky car phone from the 1980s, not a mobile phone, but a huge big thing, and saying, "Oh, Harry, I'm just going to have a conversation with somebody. Please, not a word to anybody." Yeah. And Mr. de Klerk on the phone, like, "Yeah, Nelson, okay, we're thinking of letting you out of prison now. Harry, not a word about this to the press, eh?"
Yeah, no, he was very discreet. He wouldn't even tell us. We used to ask him questions, and my mum and I, he wouldn't tell us what he heard in the car. So I remember my dad every morning used to go down to the garage and clean the car very early, preparing the car for work that day. And he had to behave very politely when he drove these important foreign dignitaries and politicians. So he had to have a lot of etiquette. I think etiquette is another French word, isn't it, Reza?
Yes, I think it's the same word in French, but not to be confused with the Spanish word etiqueta. It's nothing to do with that. Etiqueta in Spanish is a label in English, like what you get at the top of your T-shirt around the neck saying where it's made. That is a label in English. Etiquette is the formal rules of polite behavior in society, particularly amongst professionals. So chauffeurs have a certain etiquette, a certain set of rules which they must follow.
Exactly. Would you ever consider working as a chauffeur? Would you like this kind of job, driving famous people around?
Yes, I would. And I do it pretty much anywhere in the world except Albania, where I've recently just been on holiday because they are the craziest drivers. I wouldn't be a chauffeur in Albania for all the tea in China because I reckon the life expectancy there is about 3 years. Driving all day in Albania, if you live more than 10 years without a serious accident, I'd be surprised. So apart from Albania, where they're crazy drivers, but it is a beautiful country and worth a visit, yes, I would be a chauffeur.
That was a nice expression you used, for all the tea in China. So if you wouldn't do something for all the tea in China, that means nothing would make you do it. Like you would never, ever do it. Not even if they gave you all the tea in China. I don't think I'd enjoy the job because mainly you're driving around in a city, lots of traffic. I'd imagine it would be very stressful. Also, I remember that my dad sometimes had to drive long distances, London to Scotland, for example. He didn't get much sleep sometimes, and often it's very time sensitive. So if famous people need to be in a certain place at a certain time, you have to constantly fight against the traffic to try and get them there. I don't think I'd like the stress of that, and I don't enjoy driving in the city.
Yeah, I wouldn't enjoy it so much in the cities, the big cities, I have to say.
So phrasal verbs that might be useful for Sebastian and anyone driving or chauffeuring or even driving a taxi is to pick someone up. That's a phrasal verb, to pick up. Now, if you drop your pen, you can pick it up. You take it from the floor and you lift it up. But if you pick a person up, you're not physically lifting the person up in your arms. To pick someone up means to collect them in your car. So if somebody's flying into your city's airport, you could say, what time does your flight arrive? I'll pick you up. So you can put the object inside the phrasal verb between the verb and the particle, the preposition. I'll pick you up at 6 o'clock. I'll collect you at that time. And what's the opposite, Reza? Pick someone up.
So imagine Craig's dad had to bring someone to the airport to catch a flight. Then he dropped that person off. So the opposite of pick up is drop off. I imagine your dad had a lot of pickups and drop offs. They can be nouns as well at the airport.
Yes, he did. He also was responsible for driving all of the ambassador's family. So he used to pick up the children from school and drop them off at the ambassador's residence, at the house. And constantly during the day, maybe he had to go to the dry cleaners and pick up the ambassador's suit and drop the suit off at their house. So it's constantly picking things up and picking people up and dropping them off or dropping it off at certain places.
Yes, I'd forgotten about that aspect which you've just mentioned. Not only people, but if you're working for very rich people, they get you to pick up things as well. I get my suit from the dry cleaners, and bring it to another place. And maybe this costs them, in today's money, 80, £100 to do it. For me, that's the price of a new suit. But for these guys, it's no problem.
You'd be surprised what my dad had to do. The ambassador would give him his personal credit card and say, Harry, can you go to the bank and take out some cash money for me and bring it back here? So it was constantly, driving all day. He worked very long hours. I'm sure Sebastian knows this, that if you're a chauffeur, sometimes you're working very long days.
Another cliche, particularly of chauffeurs, of politicians, ambassadors, is that cliche, oh, look, I haven't got time, Harry, and it's my wife's birthday. Would you go and pick her up something nice at the jeweller's? Did he do that as well? Did he buy presents for the ambassador?
I'm sure he did. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm sure that was part and parcel, I could say. Part of the job description, part and parcel of the job, yeah. And apart from having a lot of discretion in this kind of work, you also need to be punctual, which is the habit of being on time. You can't be late, so you have to be very punctual if you're a chauffeur.
Would I be a good chauffeur, Craig?
Well...
Hesitation in your answer?
Well, let's say that when you have to be somewhere, you usually are on time. I remember working with you, and whenever you had a lesson, I used to get to my classes maybe half an hour or even 3/4 of an hour before the class started. And you used to arrive 5 minutes before the class started, but you were never late. So you were right on time or maybe a couple of minutes before, but never late when you had to be there.
When I had to be, obligation, that's the key.
Yes. Let's take a quick break here because I know you listen to this podcast to take your English to the next level. But what about your speaking? Is your fluency improving? Are you happy with your speaking skills? My conversation course focuses on making you a more confident and more fluent English speaker. You'll join me and a small group of motivated students, and we'll meet on Zoom and have topical discussions, role plays, debates, and presentations that will expand your vocabulary and help you express yourself effectively in English. So be proactive and take the first step towards becoming a confident and fluent English speaker. Send me an email today to craig@inglespodcast.com and I'll send you details of the next online conversation course. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the podcast. Another useful word for cars that are luxury cars or any cars. Imagine a company has 30 or 40 cars that belong to the company and the employees use these cars. Then you can call that group of cars a fleet of cars, F-L-E-E-T. So a fleet is a group of vehicles that's owned or operated by a company or organization. So if a taxi company has a large amount of taxis that belongs to the taxi company, then they have a fleet of taxis.
Now, for all businesses, their clientele is very important. Let me spell that word, C-L-I-E-N-T-E-L-E. So the clientele is the customers or clients, all of them, of a business, especially regular ones, or especially for high status ones. We talk about important clientele. So it's for all businesses, but for a limousine driver or a chauffeur, it's especially important to be on good terms and have a very good relationship and to know your clientele.
Let's move on to speak about idioms now. And I remember when my dad had a long journey the following day, he'd say to me and my mum, "Oh, tomorrow I'm driving to Edinburgh," for example. And I would say, "Oh, really? What time are you going to hit the road?" That doesn't mean he's going outside and with his hand, with his fist, he's hitting the road. It just means what time is he going to begin the journey, or what time is he going to leave the house. So to hit the road means that you're going to start your journey.
Now, I imagine Craig's dad drove many, many miles in his life, and I'm sure you do as well, Sebastian, and all chauffeurs, drivers, taxi drivers, etc., and truck drivers who might be listening. But the expression to go the extra mile is an idiom, and it means to do more than is expected or required. And I imagine a limousine driver also has to do that. I imagine very often you're asked to do things which are not in the contract and you don't really have to do. For example, imagine you've been hired from 10 to 12, but it's 20 past 12 and you still haven't finished. And your client says, "Oh, please, could you just stay with me 10 minutes more? I need to go to this place." Well, you could say no, but I imagine very often they expect you to go the extra mile, to say yes as a special favor, because the clientele is so important that you would probably tend to go the extra mile most of the time.
But it's not an idiom that's specifically applied to people who drive. I could say, for example, that as a teacher, I'm sure that Reza goes the extra mile to help his students. He does something above and beyond what is expected. So in any profession, you can say that the person does more than expected. They go the extra mile.
Craig spoke about the expression to hit the road. Another expression with road, which can be used in all walks of life, all areas, is to be on the road to something. And it means progressing towards a particular goal. For example, I'm on the road to success. Yeah, more and more people are finding out about my podcast. I'm becoming more and more popular. I am on the road to success. Or another very common one, on the road to recovery. Perhaps you've been in a serious accident, you're in hospital, and the doctors say, well, he's doing well. He's on the road to recovery. He's progressing towards recovery.
If you are in control of a situation, let's say you're the boss of something and you're leading a team, you can say that you are in the driver's seat. So you're taking control and you are leading everybody forward. Reza, when you are with a group of people, do you like to be in the driver's seat or do you prefer to be in the back seat?
You won't be surprised to hear that when I'm teaching, I like to be in the driver's seat because that's the job of the teacher, to be in control of the situation most of the time. But apart from that, it depends on the situation. I don't see myself as an alpha male, a very common expression you hear these days. I don't always have to be the leader. I like the idea of whoever knows most or seems to be most confident about something in a group, let them be in the driver's seat. If that's me, so be it. If it's someone else, let it be them.
So you take a back seat normally in that situation?
Unless I happen to know more than the other people. Imagine it's a topic that I know more about. Then I think, well, why not take the driver's seat because I know more about this topic than the others? But for example, if we were trying to, I don't know, organize a football match, I would leave that to someone else to do because I don't know much about that. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, yeah, and I'm the same as you. For example, if we go out with a group of friends, let's say there are 6 or 7 of us, there's usually one person who tends to be in the driver's seat. Oh, let's go to this pub, we'll have a couple of drinks, then we'll go and have dinner here because I like this restaurant, it's very good. So in that situation with a group of people, I tend to take the back seat, which means let the other person lead. So I think we're similar in that respect.
I must say, though, I do get very tired of people who always like to be in the driver's seat.
But it's just their personality. Some people just like to take control.
But I find it boring. I find it annoying that someone presumes, oh, they're always going to be the best source of reference for something. No, clearly not. I mean, you can't be the best source of reference. You can't. It's just not possible. And anybody who thinks that they are is just deluding themselves. For example, I imagine a bloke in the pub says, oh, I am an expert on women's personal hygiene. I very much doubt it, mate, because you're not a woman. Yeah. I really don't. I would not defer to you. You don't know everything about everything. Nobody can. So I find it tiring if there's a person who thinks that they always should be, you know, the main person, the main source of reference about something. I find it tiring if it's all the time. Some of the time, yeah, but not all of the time.
But it is quite amusing sometimes when people take the driver's seat, but they're not the expert on something, because experience is a great teacher. I like just sitting back, taking a back seat and just watching as everybody realizes that this person is obviously not an expert or does not know the best place to eat or the best place to have a drink. So it's kind of interesting to see people fall down like that. Yeah,
it's usually funny. However, it can be quite depressing if it's an important job, like, I don't know, President of the United States or something like that. It can be a bit depressing if they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, sometimes when people are leading and they have no idea where they're going, it's a good idea to put the brakes on it. Brakes are very important things in a car, in a limo, because the brakes stop you from moving forward. If you put your foot on the brake, you stop moving. But you can also put brakes on something idiomatically, which means you're slowing down or you're stopping some kind of activity or process. Can you think of an example, Reza, where you would put the brakes on maybe a project or something?
Yes, imagine there's a government or a council project to build, for example, a new leisure centre. And surprise, surprise, they're building very slowly, and the budget, the amount of money they have to spend, is going up and up and up and up. And the workmen don't seem to know what they're doing. You might say, hold on, we're gonna put the brakes on this project. We're not gonna give you any more money. Let's just stop and reflect about this and see if this is going the right direction. Yeah, you're not prepared to keep spending and letting them work and not seem to get anywhere. You might put the brakes on that project.
I've just thought of an example where that actually happened. A friend of mine was interested in buying a house in Spain, down in Andalusia, in the south of Spain. And it was an urbanization where they were building 40 or 50 new houses, and they were starting to sell these houses. And my friend was interested in buying one. But unfortunately, they did not have permission to run water or electricity to this housing estate or urbanization. So they had to put the brakes on the project, because you can't sell a house with no electricity or no water. So they put the brakes on it and stopped building.
That often happens here, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Now, the next expression brings a smile to my face, because it was, no, indeed still is, one of my mum's favourite expressions that she uses with me. Apparently, I often drive her up the wall. I don't get in a car when I'm at home with her, no. I apparently annoy her or irritate her very much. And she will say to me, "You're driving me up the wall. You're really irritating me."
And similarly, you can drive someone crazy, can't you? Or drive them, "You drive me mad, you drive me crazy, you drive me up the wall." Reza, what do you think are the main differences between a chauffeur, a taxi driver, A ride-share driver and an ordinary driver.
Well, we've already spoken a fair bit about chauffeurs and limo drivers, so they need to have a great sense of etiquette and discretion, behaving properly, very punctual, knowing their clientele. You could say that for the others, but I don't think to the same degree. For example, a taxi driver, it's good if they're punctual, but they often aren't, let's be honest. I mean, I've often booked a taxi to go to the airport, and because I didn't trust them, I needed the taxi at 6 o'clock, and I told them 5:45, and they arrived at 6:10. You know?
That happens, yeah. A taxi driver needs to know the roads, but although these days with Google Maps, maybe they just need to have like a mobile phone in the car and they'd find their way. But before the internet, taxi drivers need to know where they were going.
Yes, by the way, no offense to taxi drivers. That's only happened to me a few times. I take my hat off to particularly London.
What does that mean? Take your hat off?
To take your hat off is to praise, chapeau, as they say in French or Spanish. I praise taxi drivers, particularly in London. London cabbies, London taxi drivers are famous for their incredible knowledge of the roads in London. I don't know if it's still the same, but years ago, before Google Maps came about, they basically needed to know 80% of all the roads in London, and somehow they did it. I don't know how, because there's a lot of roads in London.
Yeah, my dad had a very extensive knowledge of the roads in London, and he used to take shortcuts down small roads and alleys, and he amazed me with his knowledge of the London roads. It was, incredible memory.
And Craig, what distinctions would you make between a taxi driver and a ride-share driver? Because they effectively, in a way, do the same thing. They're not for special occasions. They're for normal, everyday things. So what are the differences between them?
That's a good question. I've only ever used ride-share once myself, and that was quite recently when I went to Liverpool. And I used Uber, and I was very, very impressed. All of the drivers were very, very friendly. The cars they used were very, very clean. The service was very good. They were punctual. They were polite. So I only had good experiences when I used Uber rideshare recently.
Do you sympathize at all with the complaints of taxi drivers who obviously are not keen on rideshare drivers because taxi drivers say, well, we are obliged to pay to have a license from the council. We get inspected. There are minimum standards of safety, security, training, hygiene that the rideshare drivers don't seem to have to adhere to. Do they have a point?
I think they do have a point, but I'm not a taxi driver. I do sympathize with taxi drivers, and I'm sure they're finding it very difficult to compete with these rideshare companies. But from a consumer perspective, and I can only speak from my own experience as a client, I was very, very pleased with the service. But obviously, taxi drivers have got a hard time now because the competition is very, very hard at the moment. What do you think?
Yes, yeah. Let's be honest. Price is the bottom line. That's what we're most interested in, and nearly always a rideshare driver is cheaper than a taxi driver. Let's not ignore the elephant in the room. We do know that there have been things like attacks, arguments, even physical attacks perpetrated by rideshare drivers on passengers. It's not common, but it has happened a few times, and it's much harder to find them, to track them down and send them to prison than a taxi driver, because a taxi driver is very easy to track down. Their license, their number plate immediately tells you a lot about them. They go in a car which says taxi on it. They're easy to find. Whereas if someone wanted to perpetrate a crime using a ride share, it would be easier to get off with it.
To get off with it means not to be caught.
Yeah.
Reza, do you think self-driving cars are going to put these taxi drivers, chauffeurs, and rideshare people out of business eventually?
Perhaps eventually, but not for a very long time. I don't think in our lifetime. I would almost bet any amount of money you like that it won't happen in our lifetime. But it might happen, yeah. What do you think?
I don't see it that way. I think we will see a change in our lifetime within the next 5 years, perhaps, where self-driving cars will start to take over these jobs. We'll have to wait and see.
Well, hold on. Your question was, will they replace? Start to take over, yes. Replace, no. In fact, already it happens. Replace? No, I don't think so in our lifetime. But grow and grow and grow and grow and grow quickly, yeah. But not replace while we're alive, I don't think.
Well, watch this space. We'll have to wait and see. We'll come back to you in 5 years and see where we are.
Craig, imagine you're a chauffeur for a high-profile celebrity or politician. High profile, very well known by the public. What challenges might you face on the job as the chauffeur?
Challenges? Well, there would be the press, the media. That would be my first concern. Obviously, if your passenger is high profile and very famous, you might have to experience being hassled or bothered or interfered with by photographers, the paparazzi, people taking photographs, maybe motorcycles blocking your path as reporters try to speak to the person in the car or take a photo. So that would be one of my concerns. Can you think of any more?
Yes, well, the main challenge would be, I think, just not to give any information away. Even without meaning to, you could accidentally say something which this high-profile person doesn't want anybody to know, and that could be the end of your contract. Could be the end of your career, in fact. And Craig, we can't go out the door without me asking you one of my questions, which probably tells you more about me for thinking about it than Craig, really. Would you consider ever having sex in the back of a limo? Of course, with chilled champagne flowing, of course, all that.
Well, I'd consider it. I might not necessarily do it, but I suppose it would cross my mind. What about you?
Well, for me, it would be, obviously, Sebastian's never going to let me take use of his services, because for me, it would be the main objective of getting into the limo. If I could possibly get off with it, it would be my number one objective.
Oh, Reza. I hope that you never end up in the back of a limousine with a bottle of champagne and a sunroof.
And a beautiful woman. Oh, no, it sounds terrible. It would be terrible, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So now it's your turn to practice your English. What's your opinion? Would you like to ride in the back of a luxury limousine and drink champagne out of a sunroof riding through the streets of Las Vegas? We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can send us a voice message and also perhaps give us an idea for a future episode, as Sebastian has done this week. You can send us your voice messages via our SpeakPipe service. That's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. And because we don't have enough money to hire limousine drivers, that is a free service which only has 90 seconds for you to leave your message. Emails, Reza?
If you want to write, you could write to either craig@inglespodcast.com or belfastreza@gmail.com.
And if you're a Spanish speaker, and we know many of you are, and you would like to improve your English with free and paid resources, visit the Mansion Ingles website at mansioningles.com. And for paid products, you can browse the online store at store.mansioningles.net.
As ever, a big thank you to all our Patreon supporters. If you're interested in this scheme, there's a link in the show notes. It's patreon.com/Inglespodcast. And through that scheme, our donors donate a small amount of money. And as a way of saying thank you for that donation, we give them access to the audio transcriptions of the podcast. And as an added bonus, some live Zoom chats with Craig so that you can further practice your speaking.
And we can't go out the door this week without thanking our Patreon supporters. Unfortunately, we don't have time to mention all of your names, but a special mention and shout out to friend of the show, Javier Toro, who has joined us this month. Thank you, Javier, and to everybody who is supporting the podcast on Patreon. Reza, what's next week?
Next week, we'll be talking about taxes and tariffs.
That taxes like rideshare taxis or?
Not taxis, taxes.
Join us next week for that very topical and newsworthy topic. Until next time, thank you for listening this week. Have a wonderful week. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends so that more people can listen. And we remind you that the music this week is by Pitts, P-I-T-X, and the track is called See You Later.